This DV8 off-road FS-1 steel full-width front bumper is for anyone with a 2007 to 2018 JK that's looking for a bumper to replace your factory plastic one that's going to add a lot of styling, but even more, a lot of functionality, and that is, I'm sure, what you're looking for when buying a new front bumper. This is going to be a nice, easy bumper to install on your Jeep. It'll bolt up very simply, 1 out of 3 wrenches, and I'm going to show you how to get it done in just a second. So as I just mentioned, the majority of you are going to be looking for an aftermarket bumper because you want either a different style and or some additional functionality, and this bumper is really going to provide both of those things, and we're going to get into a lot of those details when we see this bumper side by side with the factory bumper. As it says in the name, this is going to be a steel bumper as opposed to that plastic factory one, so it's going to hold up a lot better. It has this textured black powder coat finish on it, which does a really nice job of matching a lot of the other aftermarket accessories that you might bolt onto your Jeep, as well as a lot of the factory black plastic accents on your JK. So it is a really stylish bumper. Again, a ton of functionality, and it comes in at what I think is a pretty fair price. Now, this certainly isn't going to be the least expensive bumper on the market, but for the features that you get and just for the sheer amount of steel that's in this bumper, because it is a full width bumper, I think $550 or right around there is a pretty good deal. So as we said, nice and easy to get this one installed on your Jeep, 1 out of 3 wrenches. Let's show you how to do it. For this install, we used a 16, 18, and 19 millimeter socket, as well as a number 1 Phillips head socket with a couple of extensions, and we drove all of those sockets with a combination of our 3/8 electric impact and our 3/8 drive pneumatic ratchet, and we also used a 17 millimeter wrench. So the first step in getting your new bumper installed is, of course, removing your factory bumper. Now, our bumpers have been removed and reinstalled a bunch of times, and they're actually missing a couple of plastic pieces, so if your JK is completely stock, there are a few steps that you're going to start with. There's going to be a splash shield on the bottom of the bumper that goes from the crash bar to the bottom of the bumper. You can pop that off with a trim removal tool just by removing the plastic clips that hold it in place. Then there's also going to be a plastic piece up on top of the frame here, a plastic frame cover, and you can remove those plastic clips with a Phillips head screwdriver. Once those are gone, your Jeep will look pretty much like ours here, and all that's left is to remove the 4 nuts on either side that hold the bumper to the frame, and then of course unplug the fog lights. One thing to note about the fog lights is, depending on your year of the Jeep, the plug will be a little bit different, so the process will be a little bit different there, but just make sure you get them unplugged before you go and remove the bumper from the Jeep. So we're going to go ahead and get all of those nuts loose, get the fog lights unplugged, and get this bumper set to the side. Now we'll go ahead and unplug our fog light harness. On our 2014, it's just a pinch and pull to get the harness unplugged. With all of our hardware removed and our fog lights unplugged, we can grab the bumper and remove it from the Jeep. The last thing we need to do with our factory bumper before moving on to our new bumper is remove the factory fog lights. And they're just held into the bumper with a few Phillips head screws, so we'll get those screws removed and get the fog light housings out. Now it's time to do a little bit of assembly of our new bumper before we can move on to getting it installed on the Jeep. And the first thing we're going to be doing is installing our factory fog lights into this bumper. Now, this is set up for factory fog lights. It's all ready for them. You just need to install a couple of clips first over top of the holes in the mounting brackets. And these are going to be some threaded clips, which will allow us to very easily install the fog lights because we don't have to hold the backside to try and hold a nut, get a washer lined up, anything like that. This makes the installation a lot easier. So we'll clip one of these clips over each of the 4 mounting holes on either of the fog lights, then we can get the fog light set in place and finally install the screws. The last thing we have to bolt up to the bumper before we can get the bumper bolted onto the Jeep is our winch plate. And if you are installing a winch, you can do that at this time as well. We're not going to be installing a winch, but we will show you how to get the winch plate bolted up. So you have some nut and bolt hardware with some washers. Simply set the winch plate over top of the bumper and put the hardware through. And we all have some nuts that go on the backside, and we'll tighten everything down. Now it's time to get our bumper bolted onto our Jeep. Now the bumper does have studs out the back side of it, just like your factory bumper did. So we're going to use some washers and some nuts on the back side of that once we get it positioned on the Jeep. But those studs, they float, they move back and forth. And that's to allow for any discrepancies from Jeep to Jeep to ensure that this is gonna fit on any vehicle that you take it out of the box and try and bolt it onto. The downside to that is you have to get those studs lined up, and with it being such a big heavy bumper, even without a winch on it, that can be a bit of a tall order. So what we're gonna do is get the bumper hooked onto the frame rails. That way we can get the studs aligned and finally get the hardware hand tight and then go back and tighten it down. So when you have your new DV8 bumper side by side with a factory bumper, you can really see the differences and the similarities. As far as similarities go, they're pretty much going to be the same width. They're both going to be full width bumpers, so they are going to give you coverage from end to end. Of course, the DV8 being a steel bumper, it's going to hold up a little bit better to bumps and bruises, both on the trail and on the road, where the plastic, if you look at enough factory JK bumpers, you'll see a lot of them with caved in corners. That's something that happens pretty commonly. One of the other similarities that you'll see is a little bit of styling right in this area on the end of the frame rail, where it has this rounded edge and a little bit of a bulge, and that's pretty similar to what you see in the factory bumper. Most of the DV8 bumper is very angular, has these hard edges, but it does have a little bit of roundness here, and that's something that I think makes it look a little bit more finished, a little bit more refined, and also does mimic the styling of the factory bumper just a little bit of a nod to that factory design. Something else that's very similar between the two bumpers is the fact that it has the fog lights in pretty much the same location, and the DV8 bumper does accept those factory fog lights. As you can see, we pulled them out of that bumper, popped them right in here, no problem. Comes with all the hardware to do so, and the fact that the Jeep is wired for it, you already have the lights, it really makes sense to purchase an aftermarket bumper that will accept those factory fogs, and this one will do just that. The DV8 bumper is going to have a couple of D-ring mounts, and it does come with the D-rings for any sort of recovery, where your factory bumper is going to have a tow hook. I much prefer a D-ring because it's a really solid connection. You know that your strap or winch line or tow line, whatever it might be, isn't going to come off of a D-ring until you take it off, where with a hook like this, sometimes you can have them slide off, and that can be for anywhere from an annoyance to something that can be dangerous during a recovery situation. So I really like a D-ring mount much better than the hook that comes on the factory bumper. Of course, with this bumper, we do have the winch plate, so that's going to give us the ability to mount a winch right onto the bumper, no additional hardware necessary, bolt it up, wire it, and you're good to go, having that additional recovery option, where your factory bumper is not going to have that. And because it is a plastic bumper and not a steel one, if you did want to add a winch plate, because there are some that will work with a factory bumper, there's just a lot more that goes into getting it bolted up to give it the strength it needs. This is a nice strong bumper. You can bolt a winch plate right on top, bolt your winch on top of that, and go do some recovering. You also are going to have a couple of hoops up on top of the bumper, and most of this is going to be for styling. These are going to help push some brush out of the way if you're on a really narrow trail, so it's not making contact with the grille and the headlight area. But again, mostly this is for style. Where these do become functional is right up in the top center here, where you have some additional light mount tabs. The other thing that DV8 did with these tabs was drill some holes in the tubes themselves, and those holes lead right down under here, so you can run all of your wiring inside the tubing. It's all going to be 100% hidden. You don't have any wiring on the surface or any zip ties holding any wiring on the surface, so it makes for a nice clean installation. Of course, factory bumper, no hoop, nowhere to mount any additional lights, unless of course you're willing to drill a bunch of big holes right in the top of your bumper. So from a width standpoint and some of the styling a little bit similar, but the DV8 bumper is going to add a lot of additional functionality that your factory bumper just doesn't have. Now we can get the studs aligned and finally get the hardware hand tight, and then go back and tighten it down. Once you get the studs lined up and through the frame horns, you can put the hardware, flat washer, lock washer, and nut over top of the studs. And once everything is all tightened by hand, we'll go through and tighten everything down. The last thing we need to do is plug in our fog lights. So if you are looking to add a full width steel front bumper to your JK to add a ton of function and some more style, I would recommend this option from DV8 Off-Road, and you can find it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.